Welcome to 2015 and Total Picture Radio. We produce cutting-edge videos, webinars, and podcast interviews with a focus on talent acquisition, recruiting, HR technology, leadership, and innovation. Visit our conference and events page on TotalPicture.com to learn about Total Picture Media's unique video and podcast marketing opportunities available at many of the most important conferences and on conferences throughout 2015. My special guest today on Total Picture Radio is Tim Leberecht. He is the Chief Marketing Officer of NBBJ, a global design and architecture firm, which helps organizations like Amazon, Boeing, Google, Samsung, and Starbucks create meaningful experiences. Previously, Tim was Chief Marketing Officer at Frog Design. Hi, everyone. This is Peter Clayton, and welcome to a special innovation, career strategy, leadership channel podcast on Total Picture Radio. I really struggled with deciding where this interview belonged because Tim's brilliant new book covers so much territory and has such a unique and fresh point of view on business and careers and life. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, first of all, thank you very much. And secondly, I don't use adjectives like brilliant very often, so you're in for a real treat today. Now, I admit that when I first received a review copy of Tim's book, I really was like, my cynic came out. The book is called The Business Romantic. Give everything, quantify nothing, and create something greater than yourself. And here's the cover. And then, I put it on this whole stack of books that I had received. And then a couple of days later, I watched a video of Tim talking about his new book and became really intrigued. And by the way, you'll find links to this and this video and many other resources, including his TED Talk on Tim's feature page in the Innovation channel of Total Picture Radio. In the video, he says, "I believe romance is the ultimate differentiator in a world of optimizers and maximizers." Now, those are two business buzzwords that have gotten an awful lot of work out lately. So, Tim, welcome to Total Picture Radio.
Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. Great to be on the show.
So, before we dive into optimizers and maximizers, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm a passionate marketer. Spent my entire career in marketing and the communication side mainly. Grew up and started my career in Germany, and then I worked for Frog Design, as you mentioned, for 7 years, and then most recently I worked for NBBJ, global design and architecture firm. And actually, very early on in my career, I was a musician. So I played in a rock band called Migraine, very much to the chagrin of my parents, and it was very successful. But it was an amazing time, and I still very fondly think back, and I learned a lot actually about collaboration and creativity and how to work with other people. And I love the intensity of it, sort of singing your heart out, being in front of an audience. And in a strange way, I now work in marketing. I no longer write songs, and I write presentations and proposals and memos, but I'm still seeking to express myself, and I'm still trying to find the same romance, the same intensity of emotion in a business environment. And that's what inspired me to write this book, hoping that there are other business romantics out there, and create some kind of manifesto for the business romantics out there.
All right. So in prepping this interview, Tim, I watched your TED Talk, which is called 3 Ways to Usefully Lose Control of Your Reputation. And I have a few questions I would like for you to unpack. First, quote, "Companies have more control over the loss of control than ever before." Can you please expand on this idea?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a common saying that we say companies are losing control because of the radical transparency that is a product of social media, right? Everything is now shareable, instantly accessible. Our behavior is exposed to broad daylight. We are basically monitored as organizations, as brands, 24/7. But I think marketers have never really been in control. Businesses have never really been in control, right? We always our reputation was always at stake and was in the hands of our customers, and how we showed up and how we lived up to our promises was out there. There's this nice adage that says your brand is what other people say about you, when you are not in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what is changing now is that social media technologies allow us, Twitter, Facebook, social networks allow us to be in that room with our customers 24/7, to listen in, to join the conversation, to start conversation, and then adjust almost in real time and course correct. So in a way, we have more control now over the loss of control, and I think that companies are realizing the benefits also of giving up control, proactively giving up control. Microsoft did that when they launched the Microsoft Kinect, and it was hacked by customers. First, they resisted it, and
Mm-hmm.
then they embraced it and created a community of very loyal users. Netflix, for example, allows their employees to set their vacation time themselves, giving them freedom to do so. So I think, interestingly, proactively giving up control actually puts businesses and organizations in control again. And I think that's an interesting observation that more and more businesses appreciate and implement.
You know, Tim, a lot of these organizations are kicking and streaming and screaming into this whole social media sphere, and I know a number of companies, large companies, who still block Facebook, who still block LinkedIn, who still block YouTube from their firewall within their organizations, and a lot of these are in financial services and defense contractors who say, well, and you look at what happened with Sony recently. I mean, these companies are really, really concerned about security.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, and and rightly so, right? And I think it really depends on the industry. When you work in the healthcare industry or in other industries where privacy is of utmost importance, right? And they're very much trust based. You want to tread very carefully. I'm not advocating sort of a model of total transparency, or
Hmm.
saying that this kind of conversational marketing is sort of the holy grail. In fact, I think what my book is trying to describe is that there is actually a backlash and a counter movement to this notion of radical transparency and oversharing in a way. And in my TED talk, I say when everything is open, nothing is open.
Right,
So at that
right.
very moment when openness becomes the norm, then it's very hard actually to encounter experiences that are meaningful again, right? We're sort of drowning in this abundance of sharing, of information, of openness, and there's open leadership and open innovation, open work cultures. There's a whole area of literature that's been written about openness. But I think increasingly, because of the incidents you mentioned and privacy violations, and this notion that we cannot retreat from being a personal brand and having to show up all the time, right? In the spirit of openness on social media, I think there is an interest in more intimate, in more private experiences, and I think a growing number of businesses are catering to that and creating these new formats that are a little bit more opaque, more secretive, more mysterious, more romantic, and not necessarily entirely open or transparent all the time.
There's one more thing I would like you to talk about in your TED Talk before we jump into the book, which I thought was really interesting and brilliant, and that was Patagonia's campaign, Don't Buy This Jacket. Can you describe to our listeners what that was all about?
Yeah, that was an amazing campaign, and outdoor clothing company Patagonia essentially encouraging its customers not to buy. It was part of their Buy Less campaign that launched in 2011, and took a stance against conspicuous consumption and consumerism. So it was a campaign that started in 2011, and they basically said, "Do not buy this jacket." The ultimate manifestation of empowering your customers, right? I mean, really giving up control. But I think it was really interesting because what they did is they basically marketed their values. They exposed their values, which were against overconsumption, and deliberate, conscious capitalism, and I think by doing so, they created trust with their customers and created a much deeper form of loyalty than through a usual transactional marketing program. And if you want to look at the results, sales increased by a third, and I think the whole campaign actually generated $158 million in sales. And all of that based on the notion of this call for action: do not buy. So I think it was quite remarkable and a great form of authentic values-based marketing.
Yeah, it really was, and what a unique approach, All right. So a recurring theme throughout your book, The Business Romantic, talks about creating relationships and getting past the transactional nature that's prevalent in so many business today. This is certainly a focus of many of the HR and talent acquisition leaders I've been talking with recently, using things like talent communities and affinity groups to attract and engage potential job candidates. So, can you give us some examples, perhaps within your experience, of building successful relationships with a specific audience?
Mhm. So one of the rules and one of the rules of enchantment, as I call them in the book, is called "Give more than you take," and it alludes to the power of generosity, of creating experiences that might not necessarily produce an immediate return on investment, that build though a strong emotional attachment and and loyalty over the long term. And so one example, that was probably the most successful marketing campaign that I ran while I was at Frog Design, was called Trash Talk, and it was an example of a brand becoming an amateur again, so doing things for the first time and showing up as an activist and not just talking about things. So one of our employees started one day, in an effort to promote more deliberate consumption, to collect her own trash. She wanted to highlight the garbage consumption, and she carried that in a plastic bag with her through the streets of Austin, for a few days, and garnered a lot of attention. And she began to write a blog about it. So it was amazing. And then other employees in the organization picked up the idea, did the same thing, collected their trash, carried it with them in this plastic bag. And then our customers, clients, partners, people all over the world, from Austin to Shanghai, began to do the same. And it was interesting because she was a designer, but she did something that pushed her out of her comfort zone, that she did for the first time. And we as a brand literally lived up to our values by doing something quite quirky and uncomfortable and unexpected. And I think that in and of itself was a very romantic action, and I think a great example of how very sort of sincere, genuine actions sometimes create much more traction with your audiences than false promises or very shallow marketing lingo that I think we tend to use just because it feels safer often. So I think taking a
Yeah.
risk, putting ourselves out there, is a great way of building real relationships that outlast just the campaign.
Into that same idea, I think it's become quite obvious to most companies that employees and candidates today are looking for more than just a paycheck. Corporate social responsibility is important, especially to the Gen Y and Gen X cohorts, and the concept of purpose, meaning, and happiness are discussed at most of the conferences I've been attending over the last year. So, how does romance relate or connect with these ideals?
So I think that's really interesting that these softer metrics are now making a foray into business. I think that's wonderful that we're beginning to think about happiness, purpose, meaning, right, which has become the single most important indicator for career choices among millennials, according to studies. I'm a little skeptical about now looking at happiness and wanting to quantify it with the typical metrics, and then wanting to maximize and optimize our happiness. So I think we need to learn to appreciate what we cannot value, what we cannot measure, what we cannot quantify. So I hope we do the same with happiness. Romance, I think, in a way is a third dimension beyond perks and purpose, or beyond or somewhere in between corporate social responsibility and the noble mission of a company. So romance does not equate with happiness. I mean, you can have a very meaningful life that may not have been happy all the time. And I think romance also involves some suffering, the loss of control,
Hmm.
passion, right? Being hurt, being vulnerable. So it's a slightly different concept than happiness. And I think um, people are attracted to companies because of their mission, and certainly also compensation, but also the perks. I think romance is almost like an alternative concept. It's more about the day-to-day moments, the many moments between the top line and the bottom line, where we get to know ourselves, get to know others, where we have moments of unexpected beauty and awe, that just are more in the mundane, maybe more in the day-to-day routine than corporate social responsibility or the mission of a company are.
You have a wonderful quote. in your introduction from David White, a poet and a business consultant, which I think is somewhat of a oxymoron, but it's work is difficulty and drama, a high stakes game in which our identity, our self esteem, and our ability to provide are mixed inside us in volatile, sometimes explosive ways. Work is where we can make ourselves, work is where we can break ourselves. And I would add that certainly in the last decade or so, work has become an increasingly stressful, highly competitive, bottom line focused. You know, you better make your quota, you better fill these recs, you better get the butts in the seats. You better make your numbers. Very, back to this whole thing around transaction, and it's become a very, very transactional environment that it has really zero to do with romanticism.
Yeah, I recently heard a quote from Jeff Bukes, the CEO of Time Warner, who said, I'm a business person. I'm not a romantic." And I think we hear this very often, right? That the
Hmm.
term romance is sort of banned from professional lives. We want to be predictable, consistent. We want to be efficient, pragmatic. Those are all virtues that are usually rewarded in a business environment. I think that's strange. In our personal lives, we all crave for romance. We are longing for the encounters with strangers and the sudden disruptions to our routines, and the magic. But in business, I think we pursue this very narrow definition of ourselves. Right? We try to
Hmm.
resolve conflict instead of tolerating it. We try to minimize ambiguities, ambivalence, open-ended questions. And by doing so, I think we really deprive ourselves of a big part of our humanity. We spend 70% of our waking hours at work. So why is it that we do not create more space for our full selves? And they are inconsistent, wondrous, often wrong, inconsistent, vulnerable. And I think we need to create room and space for that, and we'll have a more humane economy overall.
When I'm reading your book, I got an email from the New York Public Library with a list of the best books that a number of their employees had read over the past year. And I went through this list, and it's beautifully written. And I thought to myself, for the last few years, I've read nothing but business books. And I thought, again, in reading your book and this whole idea of bringing some romanticism back into your life, that I'm going to pick up some of these novels, and because I really enjoy reading novels, and you get so caught into these grooves and focused on certain things that you forget about other things that are really fulfilling and enriching within your lives.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think business is this. It's sort of the ultimate adventure, right? It's so important in our lives, and it is a very dramatic, romantic playing field for living the full range of our emotions. And I think there's a lot to learn from novels, from liberal arts in general, from poetry.
Hmm.
And I think the more we can appreciate that, in addition, not in lieu of business paradigms, but in addition to the typical mechanics of business, I think the richer our experiences at work will be.
I want to quote from your book again because this sentence just blew me away. The faster we move from automated production to automated decision making, the more human agency we risk giving up. And I just did a podcast with Bill Kutik, who's a HR tech guy, and talking about predictive analytics and how that is the hot topic in HR this year. So, can you delve into this thought for us? Because it seems like more and more of businesses trying to get into this, making these decisions for us and automating everything we're doing.
Yeah, I think we're facing a another great disenchantment, right? Business has always been very numbers driven, but now on top of that, it's also becoming very data driven, and I think we tend to have a very myopic belief in the truth of data, right? The quantification of everything, and that's obviously affecting our lives as consumers. From the Pebble Watch to Fitbit to Uber, it's all data-driven business models that affect our lives and how we live our lives. The quantified
Hmm.
self movement, but it's also happening at the workplace now. There is a new. Some people call it digital Taylorism, right? Really monitoring, tracking, aggregating, analyzing, quantifying, optimizing our behaviors at work, and not just our performance, but also how we interact with others, when we are happiest, our mood shifts at work, the social dynamics in meetings, all of that. There's an app for it, and that comes with a lot of benefits, and it often allows organizations to make better decisions. But I just feel like we need to be very aware of what we're losing when we track and record everything. What we're losing are those moments of surprise, moments when we act against better knowledge or against the numbers just based on intuition or imagination. Those moments are beautiful moments, right? That really make a big part of our humanity. And if we completely delegate all of our decisions, all of our emotions eventually to machines, then we will basically have outsourced ourselves. There's a great quote from the New York film critic Manohla Dargis about the movie Her, in
Mm-hmm.
which the protagonist falls in love with the operating system. And the quote says that the question is not whether machines will be able to think. The great question will be, will humans still be able to feel? And I think just a wonderful quote to describe the perils of this myopic belief in technology as the holy grail at work.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I was talking to a friend about this the other day. So many people now when they plan their vacations, they plan everything out to the minute, to the second. And I think there's something to be said with showing up in a foreign city and not having any plans and just kind of taking a walk and just going off in some direction and exploring.
Yeah, it's the walking without maps, right? At the
Yeah.
discovery, and but that is so interesting. We at MBBJ, the company I work for, a design and architecture firm, we design workplaces for companies like Amazon, Starbucks, Samsung, and many of these companies now come to us and ask us for serendipity.
Mm-hmm.
They have begun to appreciate those serendipitous encounters and the friction that's needed for innovation and to overcome the routine. So they're moving away, I think, from a paradigm of efficiency and convenience when it comes to workplace design, and increasingly also, I think, for organizational design and how they run their businesses. So I think there is a shift happening, and I hope we're seeing the modest beginnings of a new romantic age in business that's no longer just about being smart and efficient and know it all based on data, but really incorporating some of what makes us human back into the realm of business as well.
There was a recent survey that Career Builder published, which one of the questions that they asked all of these corporations had to do with, these cubicle farms that everyone has created. And it seems there is a movement and a trend away from the cubicle farms, which I think is marvelous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's great examples. The Barbarian Group in New York is an advertising firm. They created what they call the Infinite Desk. It's basically a super desk that sort of meanders through the entire office, so people can sit at different spots every day. Their perspective changes. It facilitates these serendipitous encounters I talked about. It's a beautiful idea.
It really is. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question you posed in your book, which I found very intriguing, which is, what are your first memories of work?
Whew. That's a good question. My first memories of work were when I worked as I was studying law in Germany where I grew up, and I worked at the airport of my hometown for a few months as a student, and I worked on the tarmac, and I was putting bags into the bellies of into planes. Essentially, it was a tough job, and but it was great though. It was a very romantic job, in fact, because first of all, I was exposed to the desire to travel. I love planes. I loved airports. They represented sort of the allure of a whole other world out there to me. But it was also interesting, just sort of the intensity of this job and experiencing it with others, and sort of challenging myself to find beauty in the seemingly mundane. So that sort of I remember the smell. I remember how it felt. I remember the heat. In the summer on the tarmac, I the kerosene and the fuel. I vivid memories.
In the first section of your book, you profile a number of archetypes: the lovers, the business travelers, the outsider, the voice, and several others. Was there any one romantic quality that they all share?
Well, I think they all have in common that they do things for the love of it. which means that they at certain points in their careers or even every day they make smaller or bigger decisions that are counter to maybe the wisdom of data or the logic of business. And it all paid off for them in a sense of having better relationships, richer experience at work, and being more fulfilled in the long term. And that also makes them, I think maybe that's another characteristic of romantics. It makes them contrarians in a way, right? So they're all
Right.
rebels, more or less so, but they're all in a way contrarians in their environment and have carved out some space where they enjoy the freedom to make decisions that are not purely based on data or the business logic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a wonderful section of the book, and I highly, again, I highly encourage the listeners of this show to pick up Tim's book. You posted a job on Craigslist with the following title: "Seeking Business Romantic to Join Our Team," with a lengthy description, including responsibilities like going on regular hikes with the CFO, elevating day-to-day interactions and transactions, shifting organizational brand cultures from utilitarian transactional to generous and transcendent, doing things for no reason and taking part in joyous, aimless activities, such as mystery meetings. So, what was the result of this? What happened?
Yeah, we did this just to test the market demand for a business romantic position, and also just to kind of like play with this notion of a typical job application and see what happens. And yeah, it was amazing. We put it on Craigslist, and we got, I think, within the first week, we got 100 or so applications. So some of them mistook it for something real, and sent us really earnest applications. Others were quite playful and sent us poems. We even got little sketches and drawings, and I mean it was beautiful. And I remember one response was from a woman who emailed me and filed her application and said, I love this job. I wish it existed, but even if it did, I would not apply, because it would be utterly unromantic to actually get it. And I think that was quite beautiful.
So the second part of Tim's book covers what he calls rules of enchantment, with chapters like finding the big and the small, be a stranger, keep the mystique, and give more than you take. And in part three, which is Into the Fire, you'll explore measures of success, the new romantic age, and a business romantic starter kit. So Tim, I feel like we could talk for another 2 or 3 hours about your book, but I really want the listeners of Total Picture Radio to experience and get inspiration in the business romantic themselves. So thank you so much for taking time to speak with us here on Total Picture Radio.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Again, the book is titled The Business Romantic, published by Harper Business, and available now. On Tim's show page, you'll find links to his website, his book, his TED Talk, and other resources. And also, we recorded this in video, so if you'd like to watch the video, you'll find it on YouTube. While on Total Picture Radio, please sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to our iTunes channel, and join the conversation on our Facebook group, Total Picture Radio. Connect with Tim on Twitter at Tim Leberecht, which is TimLebercht. And you can connect with me at Peter Clayton and at Total Picture. And thanks again for tuning in. I look forward to continuing the conversation and hearing from you.